Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 205, Unmasking Anxiety, Exploring Trauma, Authenticity, and Anger. Well, welcome back to this month, as you know, has been focused on anxiety. One of the biggest things that I help clients work on, I think, over the years, because it causes so many problems for them. Now, last week, if you were with us, we explored social anxiety and how it's often comprised of shame and perfectionism and lots of fear. Well, today I want to talk about generalized anxiety, which can run the continuum from just low-level annoyances to truly debilitating and everything in between. Wherever you are on that line, anxiety will limit your life, I think, and take its toll both physically and mentally over time. But before we get into all this, I just want to take a moment and remind you guys that I'm doing a Facebook Live Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And all you need to do is join the Facebook community group, which is private and safe. And I vet everyone that comes in the door so that you can watch it. It's about 30 minutes long. I'm going to be doing these each week, and it's a great way for you to jump in there and learn and connect with others and ask the questions that you need answered. So the link for that group is in the show notes. Go over there and jump right in, and I'll see you at the Facebook Live. All right, so back to anxiety. So when we talk about general anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder is the clinical term, or GAD for short, we notice that there are a lot of similarities to social anxiety, but social anxiety, I think, is more of a slice of anxiety. It's more specific. So both GAD and SAD, social anxiety disorder, involve excessive worry, although the focus of the worry differs. In GAD, the worry is more generalized, looking at a lot of parts of your life, like your work, your health, your relationships, and everyday concerns. Whereas with social, the worry is primarily focused around social situations. The fear of being embarrassed, judged, or humiliated. I personally think that people with social anxiety have other anxiety. They might not be aware of it. It might be so out of their view because they're so focused on just the social situations. People with both GAD and SAD can experience similar physical symptoms, though, of anxiety, like restlessness, muscle tension, fatigue, irritability, trouble sleeping. There's a lot of anticipatory worry, where you're worried about something that's going to happen or might happen. With social anxiety, it's specific to maybe an upcoming event, whereas with GAD, it's pervasive. It's about everything. Both have negative self-evaluation a lot of times, a lot of self-criticism and worry about making mistakes, or being inadequate in various areas of your life. With social anxiety, the focus of negative self-evaluation, though, is centered around your social performance, leading to a fear of being judged or rejected by others. Avoidant behavior. They both have it. And it makes sense. If you're afraid, you're going to avoid something that might seem harmful to you. Because although the nature of the avoidance differs, in general anxiety, you might avoid certain situations or activities due to worry or fear of potential negative outcomes. With social, you mainly avoid social situations because you're trying to minimize or avoid the interactions altogether to prevent anxiety. So both really can impact your daily functioning. When you have general anxiety, you really struggle to make decisions, to concentrate, and to be productive because you spend so much time and energy with excessive worry. With social anxiety, it can really get in the way of you forming and maintaining relationships like we talked about last week. You're not going to take career opportunities. You're not going to take a risk, and you're going to miss out on a lot of great social interactions and activities. So there are some similarities there, but today we're going to focus more on general anxiety. And I just want you to think about, if you're listening for yourself or you're thinking about a loved one in your life, there's a continuum of this stuff. So you don't have to identify with every little thing to struggle with it. And I just want to say that. It can be very universal as it is individual. So let's look at some of the impacts of general anxiety. One of the biggest ones, like we just mentioned a moment ago, is it's really hard to focus on the tasks at hand because there's constant worry and anxiety, and it's so distracting. And that can really lead to problems with getting things done and completing work or school assignments. And your brain can't even remember stuff because it's just so hyper-focused on the worry. Another impact is interference with your social relationships. It's really going to make it hard to form and maintain close relationships with other people. You're going to do a lot of avoidance. You're going to avoid social situations. You're going to have trouble opening up to others. And this can lead to a lot of loneliness and isolation and way too much time up in your head. If you've had days like that, you know what I'm talking about. Our brains are wired for negativity, people. If you sit there long enough, you're not going to think of the best possible scenario, probably. Trouble sleeping. Almost every client that I've ever worked with anxiety also has sleep issues, and it makes sense. They have a hard time falling asleep, or maybe staying asleep, or both. They don't wake up feeling very rested. This can obviously compound the fatigue and the trouble concentrating and getting things done. And what about mental health? Okay, it can really increase your risk of developing other stuff, like depression, substance abuse to medicate that anxiety, OCD. I mean, there's so many avenues that anxiety can take. So those are some of the impacts. Today, we're also going to talk about connections between anxiety and anger, anxiety and trauma, and anxiety with authenticity. So let's talk about early trauma. We have been focusing this month on some of the origins of anxiety, and we've touched on this in an earlier episode, but we're just going to go over it here again a little bit. And while it's important to note that not everyone with GAD has experienced emotional trauma, I think most people I've sat with have. But here are some examples of emotional trauma pieces that could really contribute to having anxiety. So, standard childhood trauma that we all think about, like abuse, neglect, adverse childhood experiences. When you're a kid, that can have a lasting impact on your emotional well-being. This includes physical or sexual abuse, if you witnessed domestic violence in your home. Even growing up in a chaotic or unstable environment will do it, because you don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes. Will mom lose her shit at dinner because someone's late or someone didn't eat their potatoes? That sets up that low-level PTSD we've talked about here on the show, where you don't relax. You can't relax because you don't know if it's going to be a great night or an awful night. You don't know how people are going to act in the next 5 minutes. So the stability is very fragile. And so therefore you have to stay on alert. And after years of doing this, you probably don't even realize you're doing it anymore. It's become so normalized for you. The other aspect of childhood that can really create anxiety is loss or bereavement. Losing a loved one, like a family member, a parent, a close friend, can be really traumatic for kids and create a lot of anxiety because bad things did happen. It's real. Because you're worried about future losses or concerns about your personal safety, safety of loved ones, safety of everyone. So you're going to be anxious. Maybe in childhood you witnessed a traumatic event like a physical assault, a natural disaster, military combat. You can end up with symptoms of PTSD, and they can really overlap and intertwine with GAD. They're co-occurring for a lot of people. Maybe in your family there was just chronic stress, like financial problems, relationship problems, things always happening in the family. It takes a toll on mom and dad, and it takes a toll on you. Maybe there was a medical event. Maybe you were diagnosed with a severe illness, or someone in your life was. Maybe there were traumatic medical procedures, life-threatening conditions. Things got really scary. Or maybe a parent with chronic pain or medical stuff creates, again, just this low-lying anxiety, but it's still there. So imagine that all this unresolved trauma and grief, it's got to play out somehow, and usually in sneaky ways via anxiety, which is so much more socially acceptable anyway, right? It's so much easier just to be anxious or busy or frantic than it is to be angry or sad or depressed. Speaking of anger, let's talk about anxiety and anger. I often ask my anxious clients when they talk about their anxiety, where their anger is. It usually stops them cold, and they stammer or they look terrified. Of course they do, I tell them. When you learned early on that you weren't allowed to be angry, or you didn't want to identify with anger since what you saw was very unhealthy and maybe awful, or you have old trauma that includes rage, yes, appropriate rage that was never processed because you just couldn't do it. So to survive, you stepped over all that stuff, all the trauma, all the unmet emotional and psychological needs, and maybe focused on doing, not feeling or being, ignoring the real self, the vulnerable parts, the truth. That's also why, if you have anxiety and don't do anger, well, you probably struggle with boundaries too, which, of course, just creates more anger that you learn to stuff so gracefully that often goes unnoticed on the surface. But here's the thing. There are a lot of types of quote-unquote hidden anger or invisible anger that a lot of people don't realize, especially if they don't want to identify at all with their anger or being an angry person. The first one is procrastination, especially if it's an imposed task, like somebody wants you to do something. And so you're going to grab some pseudo control and say, F you, I'll do it when I darn well please. There's perpetual and habitual lateness, not showing up on time for things, especially certain things or maybe with certain people. It's a way for you to leak out your annoyance or anger in a sideways fashion. A lot of sadistic or ironic humor. Lots of sarcasm, cynicism, or flippancy when you're talking to people. Or over-politeness, constant cheerfulness, an attitude of grin and bear it, so total denial. Someone who does a lot of sighing and they don't even realize they're doing it. Maybe smiling when you're hurting or feeling angry. Maybe you laugh when you're upset. Inappropriate emotional response. Inappropriate to what you're feeling. That is. A lot of frequent disturbing or frightening dreams. This next one is something I work with clients around all the time, and so many times it's an indicator of trauma that has not been looked at, is an over-controlled monotone speaking voice. So you don't have a lot of inflection in your voice, so the reason why people can be monotone, and they may not even be aware of it, is so you don't let anybody in. They're not going to know how you really feel because you're not sharing it. You're keeping it very matter of fact and keeping it about it and not about you. Sleep disturbance is a big indicator of anger that needs to be worked through and grieved. Getting really tired, especially in certain situations around certain people. Try to pay attention to that. Feeling like really lethargic, like you just, laid down in a field of poppies, like, God, I'm really just wiped out. Excessive irritability, easily triggered by stuff. Getting really drowsy or sleepy at very inappropriate times, like when it's rude, like at dinner. Clenched jaws, especially when you're sleeping. Facial tics, fist clenching, other physical things that we might do and we're not aware of it. Grinding your teeth when you sleep. Chronically stiff or sore neck. And then depression. Extended periods of feeling down for no reason that you can identify. In other words, unresolved grief, because anger is that stage of grief that we all got to do if we're really going to do some grief work. And clients argue with me all the time around this. They want to skip to forgiveness, and you can't. It's not real until you feel it. And if you're not angry about something awful that happened, there's something wrong. And this brings us to authenticity, because you can't be real. Generalized anxiety can be connected to not being authentic because you're disconnecting from yourself. And here are some ways that you can do that. So if you're doing constant worry about judgment, you're going to really just get so wrapped up in that. You're so worried about being criticized. Well, this is going to lead to a tendency to hide your truth because you don't want to be rejected or disapproved of. This stems, I think, from truly being rejected early on by caregivers, your big brother, your cousin, the babysitter. So to survive, you had to choose their approval instead, which meant you had to be the kid they needed you to be. Because they're not good enough was projected onto you. You needed to be maybe quiet, compliant, not angry or expressive, because they couldn't handle their own feelings, so certainly they could not detach and handle your meltdown at 5. So there goes being a separate, valid individual. That's how it connects to losing who we are in order to be approved of. And you know what that brings out? People-pleasing. Because people-pleasing behavior started out as parent-pleasing. To avoid conflict or gain acceptance, with anxiety, you're probably also doing a lot of people-pleasing behaviors, even the subtle ones you don't notice right away. You might sacrifice your own needs, your desires, and your values to please others, which can really result in a disconnection from the real you, because we're faking. And there are several reasons why people do this. One is the fear of rejection or disapproval. You have a really strong desire to be liked, accepted, or valued. And then you believe that by fulfilling others' expectations and desires, you can secure those positive outcomes. Bingo, control issues. This is where they come from. They're born out of necessity, for sure. You can't be the real you and be focused on managing some kind of impression. The other reason why you can people please is a hell of a lot of fear of conflict. People pleasers find it so hard to assert themselves or express their true feelings or opinions because that might not go well. Like speaking up or disagreeing with other people is probably going to lead to conflict, tension, and the ultimate, right, like we've talked about here on the show, abandonment, the loss of that relationship. As a result, you're going to choose to prioritize the needs of others over your own. Because it's so much easier. It's the path of least resistance. So somehow you've got the message, either overtly or covertly early on in life, don't piss people off. Don't set boundaries. Be what they want you to be so you can be accepted and loved. Do you see how you're outsourcing your self-esteem by doing that? The other thing we have to take into account is societal and cultural conditioning. Because a lot of societies emphasize the importance of being polite, being accommodating, being selfless. And a lot of people are taught that you have to put other people's needs before your own, because it's the moral thing to do. But that can really get distorted and mess with people. I work with this a lot. However, while people-pleasing behavior might look beneficial on paper, it can have a lot of negative consequences. I mean, you're constantly sacrificing your own needs. You can become so disconnected from who you are that you might not even know what you want anymore or what you need or what you value. I've sat with people who are there. They've spent so many years people-pleasing and being anxious and trying to control outcomes. They don't even know who they are anymore. And it's really going to lead to a cycle of resentment, frustration, burnout, physical burnout, because you're constantly neglecting your own needs. You're not setting boundaries. You're really just shoving down your personal opinions and desires. That's going to take its toll. You can't love and be proud of yourself and have confidence in yourself if you are not connected to who you are and showing that to the world. Anxiety means you have a lot of fear of being vulnerable because authenticity requires it. The willingness to be open, to be honest, to be genuine, to tell people how we really feel. But you're really going to be afraid to do that if you struggle with anxiety because you don't want to be hurt or rejected or something bad happen. So guess what? You're not going to be emotionally honest. And I have challenged my clients in the most loving way I can and say, you're lying. You're lying to these people. You're not telling them the truth. You're couching it in a way that's palatable for them and makes you look good. We have to get disgusted with doing that and not want that, right? Because we want to essentially like who we are and present that liked person to others. We all want to do that deep down. So, of course, if you're doing all this overthinking and self-doubt, you create a lot of noise in your head and you don't have confidence in your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own decisions, your own desires. It's really going to keep you from embracing your true self and expressing your authentic voice. And I think a lot of times, and you've heard me say this before, that anxiety is a fight within yourself because you are outsourcing who you are. Your alignment is with external expectations, not internal, not who you really are and what you really believe. This is a big one. People with generalized anxiety are going to have such a strong desire to meet external expectations, or what people think they should do, even if it doesn't align with their own values and aspirations, and you wonder why they can't sit still. Because that external focus is definitely going to lead to a disconnect from your true passions, your values, your goals, and your identity. In other words, you're going to be doing what you think other people need you to be or need you to do, not necessarily what you want. So, anxiety is often a case where we are hiding our authentic self, not just from others, but first from ourselves. Because this can play out over such a long period of time, it's going to take some time to unpack all of that. I've done a lot of work over the years with people who struggle with generalized anxiety, some dysthymia where they have a low-level depression, and lots of social anxiety and self-esteem. I think they're all interconnected, and that's just me. I also help people get out of that and work on the things like we talk about on this show, to realize what they really think, feel, and need, to heal old emotional trauma, to learn how to practice healthy boundaries, both outside with other people and inside with themselves, to build self-trust, to really align their life with their values, to take care of their needs, and in turn have much healthier relationships, because then if you work on all this stuff for yourself, you're going to be able to honor that so much better in others. You're going to want people in your life who have good boundaries. You're going to want people in your life who take care of themselves. You're going to require people in your life to do the work, to do whatever healing work they need to do, because you are going to need to connect with their authentic self once you tap into yours. So today we talked about how generalized anxiety is very similar to social anxiety, yet broader. And then we went through some of the symptoms and the impacts. We discussed how it's so intertwined with the loss of authenticity and detachment from anger, because that anger is often hidden or rather leaked out in many different ways. Not working through our feelings, or owning whatever past emotional trauma or lack of boundaries brought us here can simply allow the anxiety just to get worse, and it's going to manifest in more profound ways. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you struggle with anxiety, reach out and get some help. You can work on this and get better. If you've been working on this, good for you. You deserve to have a life that you can feel so much more connected to, a life that feels real for you. If you haven't gotten the newsletter, sign up at ownitpowercast.com or hit me up on social, and I'll make sure you get one. So pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.